Hi all, a new day and new stories from Ocean Story. Just listen to this story. We recently became the owners of an abandoned property. We had visited the place several times before we started a full-scale renovation. Our goal was to clearly visualize future changes and discuss them with our contractor. During these visits, our children accompanied us, exploring the neighborhood while we did the planning. During one such exploration, they discovered a hidden cache filled with small treasures. We hypothesized that these items, including toys and small trinkets, as well as a child's diary and some cash, about $370, had been left behind by the children of the previous owners. Deciding that returning the treasures to their original owners would be impossible, given that the house had stood vacant for 10 years and its previous occupants had long since abandoned it, we allowed our children to keep the find for themselves. They were overjoyed to do so. With the renovation of the house finished, we started moving in. At this time, a distant neighbor who lives on the other side of the woods separating our house from his stopped by. He inquired if we had found a geocache. It turned out that it was his daughter who had broken into the house a few years ago and hidden the very treasure. I didn't bother telling the neighbor that my children had found the stash a few months ago and that most of the treasure had either been discarded or lost. However, I assured him that I would check it out. At that point, the kids no longer had the treasure and had no idea where it might be. The only thing left in my daughter's hands was the diary, which appealed to her because it was unusual and had many blank pages. I convinced her to return it, while allowing her to tear out the pages she had already used. My wife carefully did this, but there were few remaining pages, as our daughter had managed to use them up quite a bit. The diary still had the neighborhood girl's original entries. I offered to return the diary, despite its incomplete condition and my daughter's reading marks, which included comments on the texts. This caused awkwardness, especially since my daughter had made comments about the neighborhood girl's hobbies. The situation became more complicated when the neighbor girl found out about my daughter's comments in her daughter's journal. She was outraged that we had allowed our daughter to not only read someone else's diary, but also to leave her own notes there. Although my wife found nothing in the diary that could be harmful to the child's psyche on first reading, the neighbors considered our action unacceptable, pointing out the problematic nature of the situation, especially after we had allowed our daughter's pages to be deleted. I perceived the situation somewhat differently. Initially, I thought that the diary belonged to someone who had left our world many years ago, and people often read old diaries looking for a connection to the past. The question of money was also complicated. Apparently, our neighbor's daughter had been saving this money for years, for birthdays, Christmas, and for homework assignments. The neighbors expressed a desire for us to return the money we found. However, our children have already had time to spend it. Frankly, I don't see the need to return these funds. After all, it was a significant amount of money and everything in the house has been our property since we bought the property. I recognize that the parents of the neighbor girl probably should not have allowed her to roam the abandoned house. By raising the issue with the neighbors, I was merely expressing concern for their daughter's safety as she explored the abandoned property. I did not seek to criticize, as everyone knows better how to raise their children. Nevertheless, I couldn't help but feel sympathy for the girl, realizing that a house that had been vacant for 10 years and was the site of our renovations had caught her attention. Where could the suggestion come from that it was the neighbor's child who might have sneaked in and left her mark? I did not notify the neighbors about how their daughter could have entered the abandoned house where a stash was later found in the closet of one of the bedrooms. Perhaps they learned of our move and my children discovered the stash about 5 months ago, making it a find that has long been part of our property. In this context, even an old shed in the backyard or a dug hole becomes part of the lesson a girl with a passion for research has learned for herself.